Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and welcome after a uh, month-long hiatus of during the month of Ramadan in our English language TV channel of Daanish TV, and of course of the Center for Islam and Decoloniality. And it's a pleasure to once again have another guest on the show who I'm in complete admiration of in terms of, it's a real blessing actually having this encounter with her virtually after quite a while, but also kind of remembering the amazing commitment to social justice that I saw in her and the people struggling in the southern Philippines. My own kind of introduction to my encounter with our guest, Amirah Lidasan, is that I had gone to on a solidarity mission with a group known as Peace for Life, an Interfaith Liberation Theology group, and that was the first time that I had myself become aware of what type of the nature of the struggle was taking place within the southern Philippines, the area of Mindanao, and so on. Of course, I will leave Amira to go into the details and explain. But it was an eye opener for me. Um, and one of the things that really struck me at when I went there was the not only the actual praxis of resistance, the concrete, not just kind of the rhetorical that we all have, which is important, but the kind of concrete, local, community, grassroots based activism and struggle that was going on of Muslims and Christians and others in solidarity with Muslims against what was going on. So that the picture of that stuck with me for a very long time. The only other place, quite frankly, for me, and of course, in my very limited experiences, that I saw that type of interreligious solidarity against oppression um, that I've seen has been in Palestine, actually, over the years. And so the audience can imagine that going there and seeing this incredibly inspiring, movement of people struggling in, I mean, very repressive conditions, but not letting all of these kind of the differences and whatever religion and so on and that come in the way of what they understand to be the imperative of social justice in this situation. So I give that as an introduction because I really want to highlight why I was so impressed by the incredible eloquence, the courage, the commitment of Sister Amira, and just listening to her was mesmerizing in the way that the credibility, the legitimacy, and the love of the people had for how her leadership stood out in advancing that struggle forward. So, welcome, Amira. Before I speak and on and on and on, I welcome Amira, and I think you're still on mute, but welcome and Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamualaikum to you, Professor Junaid, and Assalamualaikum to our brothers and sisters who are listening in your program.
So thank you so much for coming on. This is like, as I said, it's an incredible privilege and blessing to actually have you on here after quite a while of meeting you quite a few years ago. But I did want to start off again. I kind of gave my own very brief introduction to what was going on there, but more in terms of my own kind of reaction of being in awe of the people resisting what was going on, and in a very courageous way. But I think that what I really wanted you to do was two things, basically. One, kind of, if you could give us like a background of what is the situation in the southern Philippines. What is it that that Muslims and others are having to struggle against, um, and then we can go from there. But I think that first of all, maybe a little background would be useful for our audience.
Oh yes. Well, like the other countries who have underwent, colonization, period of colonization in our history, everyone knows that Philippines is the only Catholic country
Yes.
in Asia, but there is a big portion, or historically, there's a seat of sultanate here.
Mm-hmm.
But because of colonization, it did not continue. It was forced to fight and defend its territories. But in the process of the period of the Moro Wars, no,
Mm-hmm.
series of colonization from Spanish to American, no,
Mm-hmm.
obliterated through series of land policies and political policies. It almost obliterated, no,
Mm-hmm.
the identity of the Bangsamoro people. Um, Even under the Republic, no, Republic of the Philippines, um, we were marginalized, and along with the other indigenous peoples, no, did not have a voice, no, or if we had a seat in the parliament or in the government, it doesn't speak of the people, but speak more of the republic. So it still, no, erases the identity, and most importantly, the rights of the people to have access to their land, and their right, no, to be to participate in the political making of our country. So in that process,
Mm-hmm.
the people in the provinces have struggled, no, to protect, to defend their homeland, because at that time, during colonization, all most of the lands were sequestered by the American, Spanish and
Mm-hmm.
American colonizers, and it became, most of the lands became plantations, no, and some of those lands, to attract farmers and other landowners, no, to work for the plantation. So they initiated resettlement policies, no, encouraging people from the north, Luzon and Visayas islands, to work in the plantations, but
Mm-hmm.
providing them to have access at least more than uh, 10 hectares of land, no,
Right.
and in exchange for their work in the plantations. And meanwhile, the Moro people and the other indigenous people, um, they were they didn't have access to their land.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those were
Amira,
limited to
let me
only
let me
4
just let,
hectares.
let me just stop you there, and so that people know exactly what you mean when you say the Moro people. So who are the Moro people?
Yes, the Moro people are we are the 13 ethno-linguistic groups, no, in
Mm-hmm.
Mindanao. Um,
And Mindanao is.
Mindanao is in the southern Philippines, no,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so that's where the we um, that's where most of us are live, and that's
Mm-hmm.
our ancestral lands. And we say this because in the history you can see that that's also the heart of the sultanate of
Mm-hmm.
in Mindanao, the sultanate of Maguindanao and the sultanate of Sulu, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and the other parts of the Patapangampong of Lanao. So that's where we trace our genealogy and our tribes also. We are different from the other indigenous tribes in the
Mhm.
Philippines and in Mindanao. The others we call the Luma. There are also the Cordillera. But we pride ourselves as being the first feudal state, no?
Mhm.
Or given the if there was no colonization, we would have been the Sultanate. It would not have been the Philippines, no?
Right.
But because of the colonization, yeah, we lost most of our land. The sultanates were destroyed, and it fought, no, but due to the Supreme Court, the weaponry used against our forefathers. So most of our forefathers underwent um, massacres, no, series of massacres
Right.
under the colonization. But the struggle continued in defense of the land, no, because as more plantations, no, as a product of colonization, as more plantations were built in the fertile lands of Mindanao, more and more Moro people were deprived of their lands, no,
Right.
and
And the Moro people, just to so our audience is clear, this is primarily Muslims. The Moros.
yes,
Yes.
the Islamized, no, the
Yes.
ones who embraced Islam,
Yes.
and we trace ourselves in the Sultanate, no. So
Yes.
if I'm one of the tribes, no, part of the Moro ethno-linguistic tribe, which is
Yes.
Iranon, no, and maybe most of you will be familiar with three of the biggest, no, the Maranaos, the Magindanaos, and the Tausug, no. So these are the ethno-linguistic groups, no.
Hmm.
So because of that, because of the building of the plantations and the reclamation, sorry, the resettlement, no,
Yeah.
program of the government. So more and more of our tribes, no, have been forced, no, to defend our communities, our
Mm.
land, no, and then the reaction of the government to this um, movement for defense of our land is to employ more and more um, fascist, no,
Yeah.
undertakings, no, and
And
catapulted
how
into.
long has that been going for? Now, clearly, when I visited, it clearly was going on then as well. But I'm curious, how long has this kind of state repression against the Moros and these other tribes? How long has that been going on for?
Well, if we count the making of the republic, no,
Yes.
after colonization under the Republic of the Philippines, no, in the 1940s, it continued that same policy, no, of
Hmm.
land grabbing, that same policy of repression, no, and there were several struggles, no, from
Hmm.
different communities in Mindanao, from the Bangsamoro community. But then it was only in 1968 when the massacre, a famous massacre
Hmm.
in the Philippines called the Jabida massacre occurred, that the consciousness, the collective consciousness of the Moro people as one
Right.
political group, no,
Right.
uh, has been there was an enlightenment, no,
Yes.
within the Moro people, and that's the beginning. That's where we sort of count, no, the in 1968, the beginning of the struggle of the Bangsamoro people as one collective people
Ah.
fighting, no, struggling for right to self determination. It was
Hmm.
then headed by several notable revolutionary leaders, no, like Professor Nurmiswari and Professor Ustads Hashim
Yes.
Salamat, no. So these are the people who have led, no, the struggle of for right to self determination of the Bangsamoro people, and that's the reason why they called it the Bangsamoro people,
Hmm.
because the Bangsa meaning the nation, the land,
Right.
and the Moro people. So that's also the vision and the objective, of the movement. It was an independent secessionist movement. No, it was a an armed group. No, because at that time it was really needed because there were several programs coming from the government,
Mm.
military operations, no, that
Mm.
really um, uh, almost, no, it was almost a genocide, no, because
Mm.
massacres after massacres in the communities, and
Yes.
in the 70s also, during the martial law
Mm.
of former President Marcos.
Marcos.
No,
Yes.
yes, they also employed not only state machineries or the state forces
Right.
against the people, but they also employed the Muslim and Christian divide. No, they used that. No,
Hmm.
so what they did was most of the Christian landowners who were part of the resettlement program, they acquired more lands. No, and they became one of the biggest landowners in Mindanao. No,
Yes.
and they have employed with them several families, Christian settlers. No, and they recruited them as part of the paramilitary of the government. So they are also using the Christian settlers against
Yes.
the Moro people. That's the reason why what was popular in the 70s, or what the government wanted to let the whole world believe, is that
Mm.
Muslims and Christians are fighting in Mindanao.
Right.
But the truth of the matter is it's not, no, because most of those who were also killed by these Christian vigilantes are also Christians who were
Mm.
fighting also for their lands, because
Right.
these Christian vigilantes were employed by these large landowners,
Right.
no, and the government, no, to suppress the entire population,
Yeah.
because they want to continue plundering the communities, our natural resources, where
Yes.
most of our people reside. No, so because
I
of
mean,
that,
it seems what you've described. I mean, this is basically the and this is so depressing because it is so almost common in that in so many post-colonial states, those states simply carry over the colonial model of divide and rule between communities in order to oppress them, conquer them, pillage and plunder. And we have seen so many post-colonial states do the same thing. And
yes,
here you're providing a perfect example of that, where the state itself and the state narrative and propaganda would like the world to believe, well, this is just another religious conflict, and that they just can't get along, and we'll manage it. We'll somehow manage this.
yes.
When in fact, the state itself is instigating and the divisions for its own benefit.
Yes, yes, and that's also one of the good things, no, about what happened during the 70s, is that because the Christians were also oppressed, no, primarily the workers and the peasants, no, in those
Yes.
plantations, in those areas, no, so most of them also fought, no, and it took some of the farmers and workers, no, to be enlightened, no, and
Right.
one of those who helped in this enlightenment is the movement of national democratic forces in the Philippines, no. It is also where most of the Bangsamoro people or Bangsamoro activists, no, came from. So in these universities, these national democratic groups have sort of helped enlighten that we cannot how do you call that, in the liberation struggles, we
Right.
cannot liberate only as one tribe or one few people. There has to be a national liberation, and that sort of helped because in the Mindanao,
Hmm.
we didn't see each other as separate entities, fighting the government, but it's a one whole uh, movement,
Right.
fighting for liberation. And most of those who also helped came from the religious sector, so
Uh-huh.
in Mindanao
Interesting.
there are several how do you call that, the group of missionaries, so if you can just the history of missionaries
Right.
in colonization,
Right.
so most of our people really hate
Right.
seeing priests and nuns because
Right.
they are
Because
part
it
of
was
the.
all part of the colonization
Yes.
project. They came along with it. Right.
Yes, yes. And then they've also built schools, no? That's
Yes.
also
Yes.
part of the colonization, no? So it was really difficult for them to reach out. But then it also helped, no, that there are activists who also
Hmm.
are in the belongs to these missionaries, no?
Right.
And
Right. Right.
they gave, no, that kind of assurance that it's not about it's about unity, and it's not about let us not play with the divide and rule tactic, no, of the
Yes.
government.
Right.
And so if we count during martial law period, if we count that there are massacres within the Bangsamoro communities, there were also several massacres from the Christian
Hmm.
settlers, no. So that helped also that we were under, the same
Yeah.
parang
Exactly.
yeah, the government
Common
did not.
repression. Yes.
Yes, and the government did not
Distinguish between
distinguish me.
exactly.
Everyone is fighting. Okay, we will fight you.
Right.
So that's what happened during martial law, and it created that kind of realization for
Hmm.
the Muslims and Christians, and even the indigenous peoples in Mindanao. So up till
Right.
now, we have a very rich and long history of Muslim and Christian and indigenous people
Hmm.
unity, relationship, in Mindanao, and that's.
Incredible. Yes.
Yes, and that's where I grew up with, this kind of movement where Muslims, Christians, and Lumad, the Lumad people are the indigenous people in Mindanao,
Hmm.
are fighting alongside against repression, against martial law, and fighting for respecting each other's differences in religion and faith. No, but
Right.
the most important is their faith in liberation and faith in freedom. No, so that's
Right.
that's where
This is,
this.
and so Amira, one thing, this is really interesting because the other very interesting aspect of this, in some ways, a continuation of the anti-colonial struggle in the within the realm of the so-called post-colonial state of the new republic, but in some ways it's a continuation of the internal colonialism that exists within the Philippines or any other country itself.
Yes,
But the interesting aspect here is that, of course, uh, uh, clearly, I mean, within the Philippines, we know, I mean, and I have good friends who, of course, came from traditions, Marxist traditions, and this and that. But you also had a very strong faith-based movements. I mean, where we think of liberation theology and so on. So, I guess certainly from the Christian community, but I'm assuming also from the Muslim community, a very strong faith-based political movement against what was going on and these injustices.
yes. The groups of Moro National Liberation Front and Moro Islamic Liberation Front have their tradition of a movement based on faith, based on Islamic ideology.
Right.
No, because they are exposed, no, to that kind of liberation movements also coming
Hmm.
from Egypt, coming from the Middle East, and even in
Yes.
Southeast Asia, no.
Hmm.
But these are not millenarian or revivalist.
Right.
No, no, it's not. It's based on the political situation. It's a
Absolutely.
yes.
Absolutely. I mean, it would be more akin, similar to a group like, say, Hezbollah or something that's fighting for actually
yes,
something concretely of defending their land, and from the plunder and the pillage and repression. So it's something very concrete in which their faith-based politics come into play.
yes, and I think one of those that inspired them is the liberation struggle of the Palestinian people.
Yes.
No, so you can see that kind of connection that we they have established with other countries also for liberation or struggling for liberation in other Middle East and
Hmm.
Southeast Asia. No,
That's right.
so yeah, so that kind of inspiration also pushed, no, for the other groups also to reach out, no. So
Hmm.
you have the Moro Islamic Liberation Front and the Moro National Liberation Front also having reaching out to other democratic forces like the National Democratic Front, no.
Right.
And at one point we saw that kind of unity when they presented in an international tribunal, people's tribunal, the
Yeah.
cases of massacres, no, or the atrocities by the Philippine government against the Moro people and the Filipino people, and they have presented it at that tribunal, and there you'll see that the implementation of martial law did not differentiate Muslims and Christian, and
Hmm.
it also showed the unity of the Muslims and Christian in pushing for justice and pushing for peace, not only in Mindanao but in the whole Philippines. So
Amazing.
it's yes, so it sort of broke the idea, no, that
Yes.
this is not a Muslim Christian, ano.
Yes.
But you know, the government often uses that kind of
Of
um,
course. Of course.
narratives, if because they want to justify their attacks on the community people. So it
Absolutely.
yes,
Absolutely. I mean,
and
this is the kind of last card of scoundrel governments to use, some type of sectarian, religious, this ethnic, to divide them for their own benefit, and portray the conflict as basically this, where it's a political struggle against a very repressive state and elite apparatus of whatever religion they are, that want to control the land and resources and so on. That, whether that's in the Philippines or elsewhere. But again, the story that you're telling is so powerful because these powerful forces and states, uh, sadly, have been quite successful at creating these divisions amongst communities in many parts. We can see that in the Middle East, and so on. And that is why I think I wanted to highlight this as an example for people in Pakistan and elsewhere, other places in Southeast Asia, uh, the Middle East, of course, throughout the Islamicate world, in fact, to see that, look, that in fact, and this is the point that I was getting to, we see how there is now has emerged clearly a trend of global Islamophobia, what I call traveling Islamophobia from one place to the next, and here it is as well. But we also can look at the example that you're that of the Philippines and what's been going on there as one in which there's an understanding that this type of Islamophobia is not just bad for Muslims. It's not just, it's bad for everyone. It is bad for everyone. The way that Islamophobia manifests itself, both, I mean, the soft part is just curtailing civil liberty, civil rights, but of course the harsh version is direct repression and violence. that it's not just Muslims that will be ultimately affected; it will be everyone who will be affected by it. And I think that this is where the struggles in Mindanao and the unity and the solidarity between the different communities is, I think, a model for people to learn from about fighting this global Islamophobia, the rise of global fascism, and so on and so forth. And my final question, though, Amira, I did want to ask. So there's been this continuity, whether it's Marcos or post Marcos and etc., of of the same kind of more or less the same state policy towards the struggles going on there. So my last, I guess, two-part question is: how's it been under Duterte's government, uh, and and what is the state of the struggle? Have there been achievements made, or has or is it la lucha continue? The struggle
Ah,
continues to try to try to get to make some gains. So I think I want to ask you kind of the current state of
yes.
the movement there. Yeah,
Okay. Well, you spoke about Islamophobia, no?
yeah,
For a long time, we always say that Islamophobia stemmed from they call that the ignorance of our
yeah.
religion and faith, no, or the miseducation, no,
Right, right,
the misinterpretation in our history, no.
right.
So that we could repair, no, through these interfaith movements, no,
Yeah,
through re-education, no,
yeah.
introducing interfaith education also in our universities. It's easy, and the Mindanao people have long strived, no, for that kind of movement, no. But
Right.
if it is institutionalized,
Yes.
being used by the government to, as a means of suppression, suppressing people. So that's the very difficult part, you know, because
Yeah.
um, it will compel state forces, political forces, no, to go against their people. No,
Right.
that's what I think. That's what happened during the that global war on terror. No, in which the
Yes.
Philippines also took a big responsibility by not only supporting that, but also um, uh, uh, um, how do you call it? Hosting
Yes.
the military exercises in Mindanao, and that brought a
Yes.
lot of
Mm.
reactions, no, from the people, because
Absolutely.
it's like telling the world that we are the bastion of terrorism. Then that's the reason why the
Right.
American soldiers should be here, you know. And because also globally there was also that Islamophobic
Absolutely.
ideology, no,
That all
the clash of
governments,
civilization, no.
exactly, that all
Yes,
governments that had a Muslim population that they considered to be quote unquote problematic, all governments took advantage of this global war on terrorism to then engage in the same type of repressive policies towards them. Absolutely.
yes.
Philippines
So
would be no exception. Yes.
yeah, so that sort of took a big challenge, no, for most of us, because it sort of wanted to reduce our movements, no,
Yeah, as just simply
by
terrorists, as just simply terrorists fighting, etc. Yes,
yes,
this is what happened, Amira, everywhere. You know, the Kashmiris, the Palestinians, the now even the Rohingya, who have been just. I mean, it's a horrible
yes,
situation, but again, the claims that say the Pakistanis are training them to be terror. I mean, so this
yes.
nonsense has been repeated everywhere where there's Muslims.
Yes, no, and it's difficult not to generalize
Yeah,
all movements. No, that's one of the impact also of that global war on terrors, because all movements, no, armed movements, even if it is a legitimized, no,
yeah,
movement struggling for right to self determination, and against historical injustice, no, the U.S. government put them in the terrorist category.
yeah,
No? So that sort of had an impact for the Moro National Liberation Front and for the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, and they were forced to have a peace negotiation with the government. No, and the government during the peace negotiation, they have an on and off peace negotiation,
Mm.
and they're not really serious, no,
Mm.
in their resolution of the conflict. What they want was to just to tie the hands, no, of
Mm.
these armed movements, so that they could continue their plunder in our communities through this mining
Mhm.
policies, no, and then also continuing setting up of plantations in our communities, no. So that's a problem also, that poses a problem for the people in the communities who continue to defend themselves, because the atrocities were resorted to defend for themselves, because the Moro National Liberation Front and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front are all in the peace negotiation, and
Mm.
at the current state, no, they are part of the um, Philippine government through the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. That's the
Aha.
product of the peace negotiation.
I
No, for
see.
them to have to be part of that autonomous or the governance of the autonomous region. But then that peace negotiation is tricky, because it did not say it will stop, no, their war on terror operations, that they will
Mm.
stop, no, their suppression in the community. They will stop the plunder. No, they continued and even used, no, this autonomous region to implement most of these programs, and that has a big, much bigger effect, for the communities, because now instead of you how do you call that, you have high hopes, no, for
Right.
the liberation movements to defend you, to support you in your struggle. But then it becomes like a challenge, no, for the liberation movements, and how to see them as the new governors of the
Right.
autonomous region, or still the leader of the liberation
Right.
movements, no. And that has an effect when President Duterte
Mm.
declared martial law in Mindanao. So his revival of martial law is, they said, they are against the ISIS threat, no? They
Right.
want to curtail the ISIS threat. But I think most of you have seen the impact it had in Marawi City, when in May 23, 2017, President Duterte declared, no,
Mm.
an all-out war against the ISIS, and for 5 months they've been bombing, no, aerial bombardment, mortar shelling, military operation, and reduced to rubbles the Marawi City, the only
Oh.
Islamic self-identified Islamic city in the Philippines, and they have reduced it to rubbles. And until now, 3 or 4 years until now, um, the people are, most of those who were in that residing in that zone, no,
Mhm.
were not able to, or the ground zero area,
Yeah.
uh, they are still not able to go back. And I think they are not, or housing of the people, or making the people come back to their houses, no, is not the priority rehabilitation program of the government. So that's one of the things that I think the President Duterte, um, uh, the idea
Mm.
of having a president from Mindanao, and saying that he is so he
Mm.
understands and he can relate to the Bangsamoro people struggle, and yet he is also one of the presidents who has a big, um, should we say, atrocity, no, a
Yes.
blood debt against the Moro people. Clearly, he did not understand the
Yeah.
struggle, because what he did was, there were almost, no, a million of people, um, who were forced to flee their
Wow.
communities, no, and displaced, no, and impoverished, no,
Yeah.
because of what happened. And it's also a big reaction, no, for the people
Yeah.
to um, not only be disappointed but to be angered by that
Yes.
idea that with they thought there was already a peace negotiation.
Yes.
They thought that you have a president who understands you, and yet they still they still experience, no, the
Yes.
same kind of atrocity, the same kind of suppression, no. And
And
now
the reaction from the Moral Liberation Front or the Islamic Liberation, what have their reactions been over these years now?
yes, but well, the people are asking for a much militant reaction, no,
Yeah.
like as what they've known these
Yeah.
groups, no, would have reacted in the 70s,
Yes.
in during the massacre of our during the period where several massacres have happened in our communities. So they they know about the limitations because they are now part of the government, but they also are asking,
Right.
no,
The pressure from
beyond,
below. Yes. The
yeah,
pressure from
beyond
below.
being government, but
Yes.
a call to brotherhood, a call to sisterhood, no, a
Yes.
call to being a bangsamoro. So that's a very big challenge, no.
This
But
is yeah.
there
Please.
were protests, no? There were protests from coming from the MNLF and MILF. There were they also reached out, no? They wanted to sort of have the diplomacy, no?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
just asking the government, just like what the peace movements have asked, no, asked President Duterte not to stop the aerial bombardment, no,
Right.
and because these are only a small group of people, the ISIS, no, so
Yeah.
the destruction of the place
Yeah.
is not equal
Yeah.
to what the ISIS
Obviously,
have done.
not
So
remotely proportional,
yes, yes,
proportionate. Right. The presence of some of these crazy,
yes.
ISIS individuals. Yes.
Yes,
Right.
and it's not the martial law in Mindanao did not only contain against the against the ISIS in Marawi City. It became a 2-year program
Yeah.
implemented all throughout Mindanao, and it killed mostly activists, no,
Yes.
and farmer groups uh, who are not ISIS,
Right.
no. And then when President Duterte continued that, no, and he said that there's a big threat of ISIS
Yeah.
terrorism in not only in Mindanao but in the whole Philippines. So he wanted
Yes.
to institutionalize this kind of anti-terror program
Yeah. No.
by
Amira,
by
this is
producing this
absolutely
anti-terror law. Yeah.
this is when our viewers and listeners will be listening to you in the context of Pakistan and thinking about what's going on in Kashmir or in Palestine, etc. It is exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
They these even many Muslim governments use because Islamophobia is not just in non-Muslim or Western countries. Islam, we have Muslim regimes which are also deeply Islamophobic, and they use the threat, the often engineered or manufactured threat of some ISIS or some terrorist organization in order to implement a large-scale repressive model that targets all sorts of people, human rights activists, and others who do trying to defend, as in the case of Mindanao, the rights of people's property and land and so on and resources. So when people are hearing you, they will think that yes, this is a model that a very colonial model, in fact, that that exists in so many places throughout the world, and especially in the Muslim world. Yeah,
Yes. You know, war on terror is already 2 decades now,
yeah,
right? and they still can get away. These governments can still get away with their narrative of suppressing terror groups, no,
Yeah. Yeah.
by implementing these kinds of measures. So we have now the Anti-Terrorism Act of
Yeah.
2020, no, and it's being deliberated in the Philippine Supreme Court, and you'll see in their arguments that it's really unnecessary because we
Yeah.
already have laws, no, that could run after these kinds of
Of
groups, no.
course.
But you see, all throughout the narrative of anti terror policy, you see also that we've unearthed a lot of security sources also that says that the government is also culpable of the creation of these groups, no?
Right.
From
Right.
the Abu Sayyaf terrorist group,
Yes.
and even the ISIS and the ano.
Right.
But they still can get away with that kind of by using that
Yes.
kind of narrative. And
Absolutely.
that's I think one of the challenges also that we have in the movement. It's not to be swayed by
Yes.
that kind of and we've been exposing this, that they're just using us Muslims as a
Yes.
front, no. And if they can get away with what they are doing, the Muslim community, they can do it everywhere, no.
Yes.
So that's what we have been saying now. Before, their anti-terror policies have been it's like they can justify it by saying, oh, we have rewards, no, for those who can present an Abu Sayyaf member, a
Right.
terrorist member of the terrorist group. And mind you, most of those who were arrested, no, are innocent civilians. We say these
Hmm.
innocent civilians because most of them are vendors, no, small farmers, fisher folks who doesn't even know their rights,
Yeah.
no, because they have not studied. They didn't know
Of course.
what they were being charged of, and they only know because they were tortured into admitting, no, in admitting that they are Abu Sayyaf groups. And most of those that we have
Absolutely.
seen also the experiences.
This is the, I mean, the kernel, the hallmark of how the war on terror has operated. I mean, whether it's the U.S. government doing it in Guantanamo Bay or
Yes,
elsewhere, this is how it is operated. I mean, whether it's, whether you have been involved in anything or not, if you've just been identified to be picked up. Then you can be tortured, you can be this, that. At that point, you have no rights. Your rights are completely gone, and you're completely at the disposal of the state.
yes. And so that's in the first part, no. But under the Duterte administration, he has expanded that
Mm,
terrorist hysteria to communist groups, no,
yeah.
and also the rest of the liberation movements, and also to activists and even journalists, no. So
Hmm. Yes.
he has this institution agency that's called the National Task Force to End Local uh, Communist Struggle, armed conflict in the Philippines. So, who who's responsible for terror tagging, red tagging? No,
Yeah.
so they don't distinguish anymore who is a terrorist, who is a communist. It's
Right.
communist terrorist groups. No,
Right.
so what they did is that they tag all, no, of those who criticize the government for the fascist policies, no, who criticize them for the suppression, no. So our group, the Moro Christian People's Alliance, that's the interfaith group that I belong to, and also Suara Bangsamoro, that's my
Hmm.
political party that I belong to.
Yes.
We were put in that in most of the publication materials of this agency.
Mm.
and most of our leaders and members have been red tag, communist tag, terror tag,
Yeah.
no, and it's not a joke because it means following that red tagging is
Yes.
extrajudicial killing, no,
Absolutely.
and illegal arrest and filing of trumped up charges against activists, no, and
Absolutely.
journalists, and it's one of the things that we want to fight now. We've been exposing this, no,
Yeah.
in our protest movements, and we've also had a dialogue with the different agencies, the Commission on Human Rights, even the Department of Justice, no, to really look into this atrocious
Yes.
charges, because it this red tagging is a license, no, to kill, and a
Absolutely.
license to
Absolutely.
suppress, no, people. So um,
Yeah.
for us, no, who've been in the movement for a long time, we cannot just say that no, we have to stop talking, we have to stop criticizing, we have to stop defending our people, the rights of our people, just because they are threatening us or
Yeah.
harassing us, no. But we
That's
have
right.
to continue, no. But until when are we going to risk our lives, no?
Yeah.
That's uh, the challenge we have now
Yeah.
for the sane people still working in the government, no, not to be swayed by this
Yes.
policy of the government, to be
Right.
used, no, by the government. And come election next year, also for the people, no, for our brothers and sisters, no, to also be enlightened, not to
Yes.
continue this kind of policy by exposing the ones who lead this
Mhm.
policy, and by not voting for them, no. So
Right. Right. Right.
that's one of the things that we pose a challenge also for the rest of our brothers and sisters to really to be conscious to what is happening, and to continue to fight, no, for our rights, because
Absolutely.
we've known and we have exposed this anti-terror policy as a farce, no, as a
Yes.
means of the government, no, to suppress the people, no, and to take our rights, no, from us, no.
Absolutely.
So we
Absolutely.
must not be we must not be fooled, no, but we must continue and strive to continue to fight, no, this repressive
Absolutely.
policy.
No, Amira, thank you so much for that. And I mean, because as I said at the beginning, this uh, resonates. What you have described resonates so much with the suffering going on in so many other parts of, particularly the Islamicate world. You go to Kashmir, you go to Palestine, you see what's going on with the Rohingya or with the Uyghurs, and so on. So that's why I call it this is now global or traveling Islamophobia everywhere in all of these places where there are significant Muslim populations that exist, and that's why I wanted to really highlight that this is a very crucial struggle going on in the southern Philippines, um, and it's a very, in some ways, inspiring one as well. In which, when we spoke about Islamophobia and how it works and how it can be overcome. In fact, one of the things that I would emphasize is the interreligious solidarity component of your struggle is, I think, the most important way that Islamophobia, generalized Islamophobia in society, can be overcome, rather than just ta- speaking to people and educating them about how Islam is very nice and so on. And it's it's more about struggling together for in common cause against concrete situations of injustice. Uh, is That's where Islamophobia and all phobias are overcome, and you see the humanity in the other person, and you see the justice of the cause that you're struggling for. So this is why I really wanted to highlight Mindanao, and I will say that the the tension is the same that exists in all of these liberation movements. And I think that this will continue. I mean, here as well is this the tension and the dilemma between being co-opted in some ways, the leadership of these movements by the state, who in the name of peace and peace process and peace negotiations attempt to co-opt and appropriate, the leadership of these movements, whereas the people from below sometimes feel that, look, this they are just trying to buy us out, or buy our leadership out, and they're not really addressing our grievances, and so therefore the pressure from below to say that no, we should not allow ourselves to be co-opted, because they're not really addressing. In fact, the repression will only continue. And so this type of dilemma in all liberation movements we have seen in post-colonial states, etc. They have existed. But inshallah, in your case and in all of these other cases, the larger crucible for justice, will compel the majority of the people involved in these struggles to realize that often in the name of peace or peace negotiations or a peace process, as we know in the case of Israel and Palestine, uh, what happens is only more and more injustice and cruelties become entrenched. And so, inshallah, you have the. I mean, I'm glad we did this program. The people of the southern Philippines have the solidarity and support of me, and hopefully all of our viewers that saw this program today, who I'm sure, just like me, have been further educated on what's going on there, and are seeing that, as I would like people to see, as an extension of this broader the war on terror, broader global Islamophobia, and as part of uh, many states turning to increasingly repressive methods for to entrench elite control of their societies. And I think this is another instance of that actually entails all of these different aspects within it. But inshallah, I mean, we all pray for the continuation of the struggle for justice in the southern Philippines, in Kashmir, Palestine, justice for the Rohingya, and justice for all oppressed peoples of whatever, religious, ethnic, whatever origin they may be. But Amirah, I really want to thank you. Jazakallah for coming. And this was a very educational show, I think, for all of us. So thank you so much for being
Yes,
here.
shukran also, and thank you also for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Wassalamualaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.